Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How you doing, Ken?
Excited to be here. We have some interesting news that we would like to share with you. But first, just to welcome you, you are tuned in to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, and this is episode 200 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. And the exciting news is that the Counselling Tutor Podcast is now nudging approximately 2 million downloads at the recording of this episode, Rory. How's that?
It's incredible. And a big thank you to those people who've taken the time to listen to myself and Ken talk about our passion. It wouldn't have got anywhere near that if it wasn't for the audience. So a big thank you to the audience.
Yeah, I'm just trying to picture 2 million people, and it's
a
just
lot of people.
Yeah, I
can't.
can't picture that kind of number. Well, we're glad that you joined us today, and we have three areas we're going to be delving into today. We're going to be starting off with our Counselling Foundations, where we recognise that going back to the very foundations that we learned when we were in our formal training, that's where the golden nuggets are. And today we're going to be speaking about becoming congruent. It's a really interesting discussion. We're then going to go on to focus on self, where we recognize that you, as the therapist, you are the heart of your practice. And when we focus on ourselves, we gain better understanding and we're in better service of our clients. And we're going to be looking at feelings of incompetence that can kind of get in the way from us being our best, or at least bring up anxiety in ourselves. And then we're ending episode 200 today with Practice Matters. Rory spoke to Marion Elkin-Greener around the topic of working with addictions. Now, I've heard a little bit of this lecture that was done by Marion for the Counsellor CPD library, and it's really, really interesting stuff. And there's definitely a takeaway for you in your practice. Now, before we go into becoming congruent, we've mentioned that this we're at nudging those 2 million downloads. And what we've done in this episode is we've shared our top 10 most downloaded podcasts ever, the most popular podcasts that have been downloaded thousands and thousands of times. And you can get a full list of that by going to the show notes of today's episode. Go to counsellingtutor.com. Go to the top tab, click on podcasts, go to episode 200, and our top 10 is there. Go and look at the show notes to get the full top 10. Top 3, third place, special edition, an interview with Professor Tim Bond, and that was regarding update of the BACP ethical framework. In second place is episode number 2, parallel process, 7 stages of process, and the skill of reflection. And in first place, drum roll please, I'm doing it on my desk here. Our most downloaded podcast is episode number 1. Our very first one, which is Contracting Core Conditions and Silence. Counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab, go to episode 200, get the full list of top 10 most downloaded episodes with links to those episodes. So checking in with our Counselling Foundations. Rory, congruence in counselling.
Yes, it's a word that's it's a word that's often used, and of course it means being genuine and real. But actually, it's so much more than that. And I'd like to take you back to 1957 in the Journal of Consulting Psychology, where Carl Rogers outlined 6 necessary and sufficient conditions. And I'd like to give a mention to Otto Rank here, a psychoanalytical therapist that Rogers worked with when he was at the children's home in New York. And it was that meeting with Rank that really formulated Rogers' idea of 6 conditions. And one of them was congruence. And it's far more than just being genuine. It is the power of change. It elicits a permission, I think. If you're sat in front of a therapist and they're real and genuine, it allows that idea that if they can be real and genuine, so can I. And it pushes away those conditions of worth and interjected values. This is me. This is who I am. And I'm okay with that. This is a real person. And I was just doing some reading before we met to do the podcast, Ken. And I just thought how refreshing that idea must have been in the late 50s, when a lot of therapy was very strict psychoanalytical therapy, with the therapist sat with a notepad, sat behind the client, making notes and observations. And it was the catalyst, I think, of Roger's shift was when he was working at the children's home. He met a woman whose child was having difficulty. And he said, well, I've done some analysis here, and it's because of your early rejection of the child that the child is now having behavioural difficulties. I paraphrase. And the mother wasn't very pleased about this. She went out and she was very, very unhappy about this diagnosis. Then she came back and she said, do you counsel adults? And he said, yes. And that was a shift from him being a analyst to being a therapist. It was the roots of developing relational psychotherapy. It's absolutely so powerful. And I'd just like to say, before anybody writes to me, modern psychoanalytical therapists are very relational. Gone are the days when, that distance and kind of very, very arm's length work would be done. Psychoanalytical therapy has moved on, but it's such an underrated idea, and it brings so much change within a human to see someone who's real and genuine, and for them to aspire to be that too.
Well, thank you for kind of painting that picture. It really gives me a felt sense of that origin of where that congruence, which is like recognized as one of those conditions that facilitate changes, comes from, the history of what that looks like. And, looking at congruence, if you kind of understanding it from what's a textbook definition of congruence. Textbook definition is that you feel inside. So here within my feelings, that I'm feeling inside is what I show outwardly. It's the same. As I feel inwardly, that is what I project outwardly. And if you think about the world we live in, and the pressures of the world we live in, the social media and what you might see there's almost an incongruence in using filters to change the way that you look, in maybe putting forward a version of a life that doesn't really match what it's really like. Putting the best of you forward is an incongruence. Putting all of you forward, daring to put yourself forward as you are. This is me. This is who I am. There lies congruence. And Carl Rogers, in his theories, suggests that a client that would maybe present for therapy would be in a place of incongruence. They may be feeling feelings within themselves that are not acceptable to themselves. So they don't show those outwardly. I haven't told anybody this that I'm going to share with you now. It's hidden. It's held inside. And the feelings inside do not match who they act as and how they interact with their lives. And the process of therapy is helping them see the incongruence, recognize that it is maybe created from those, as you said, those introjected values, those conditions of worth, and recognizing how they really feel. And that's difficult. If you ask somebody, how are you feeling? Very often it's, oh, I'm fine, how are you? It's a surface glancing conversation. There's no looking, how do I really feel, to explain that. But getting a person to the point where they go, you know what, this is who I am. I'm going to dare to be who I truly am, because within that, the true me is good enough. But very often, the true me, the true self, is unacceptable to the person themselves. Oh, I can't show people that. I've got to hide this. When they ask how things are, I'm going to say everything's going fine. Well, whereas inside, there is all this turbulence, and that is incongruence. So understanding congruence, what that is, I look to incongruence to understand it better. But my question, Rory, is how congruent can we really be? Because I think for me, congruence is about our own personal development and the work we've done on self to be able to be congruent. And even if we go, you know what, I'm being congruent, are we?
Well, I think I think it's a very, very interesting question, Ken, and I would take that back to the story I've told many times about being in a supermarket with a very in front of a very kind of busy mother with a small child, and all this food's on the conveyor belt. The child said, "I want to go to the toilet, mummy." And mum said, "Well, can you hang on a second?" She said, "No, I want to go now." And a child can get away with that because everybody said, "Oh, let's go to the toilet." So all the stuff had to go off the conveyor belt and stored up, and then mum went off to the toilet. If you're in a business meeting, perhaps it's hard to do that, hard to be yourself. And I think that it does come down to personal development and personal growth. I've known people who, I've been, when I was in education, and we've been in meetings where people grumbled about, "Oh, I'm not had my lunch, and I've had to sit in this meeting." And I used to say, "Why don't you bring your lunch in and eat it?" "I can't do that. I can't do that." "Oh, why not?" No one's going to say anything. So I think it does come down to personal development. And I think, interestingly, that personal development develops in therapy. And one of the other things about being congruent, I think, is looking at our idiosyncrasies, the things that give us trouble in life. Sometimes we can be the authors of our own misfortune. And it's only when we realize that actually that's my behavior that's causing that problem, that we're really congruent with ourselves, that when we look in the mirror and we say, actually, probably the reason that I don't have really good relationships with people is because A, B, and C. And I think that's a work in progress. I think it's not something that's instantly fixed with therapy. I think therapy is the catalyst. More therapy may be the catalyst. Different ways of personally developing. But I think it's a lifetime journey, Ken.
Oh, I like that. Yes, I think that I'm going to agree with you on that. That congruence is something that we continue. It's not that one day you get there and you go, right, well, that's the congruence sorted. Moving on now to the unconditional positive regard. It's kind of, congruence is a journey. It's a lifelong journey. It's about development. When I was speaking about, are we truly able to be congruent? There are parts of us that are unseen to self. That may be seen by others. There are parts of us that are not seen to self nor seen to others, that may be subconscious. And being truly congruent, it's kind of interesting because you look at the person-centered theory, it is suggested that the counselor needs to bring congruence into the relationship. But there are questions that come up about this time and time again. One of the questions is, well, would you really share exactly what's going on inside you with the client? Are there times when you might hold something back, where you might not say something because it might be in better service of the client to not say something than to say something? But am I now being incongruent in that relationship? And then the other side of that coin is being congruent. Maybe there is an area that we are not seeing, that we're not able to bring. Is that congruence? Are we then truly bringing our true self? So it becomes an area that I think we can spend a lot of time debating. But there's the question. So you're in a session with a client brings something up. Something comes up for you where you have information or something you could point out to this client, but you don't share it. Am I still being congruent as a therapist?
It's I completely agree with you, Ken. I think what comes here is wisdom.
Oh, yes.
Certainly when you're working with clients, sometimes you have to be wise. And I think part of it is knowing what the reality is. But I think part of it is how you kind of discuss that reality with the client. Because if you haven't built a relationship up with somebody and they're telling you something and you want to say, well, this is because you're doing this, that might be too tough to say, to a client who you've only seen for 15 or 20 minutes. Maybe you just have to store that up. And when the relationship's strong and can withstand that kind of feedback, then deliver it. But it really is interesting. And my view is, Ken, that I don't think we really are congruent. I pick up on your points about that unseen to self that's seen by others. And that, again, is a work in progress. As we move through our life, there is more things that are unseen by ourselves and others. And of course, that comes back to feedback and reflection on feedback.
Yeah, I like it. And I mean, the theory suggests that in being congruent, in bringing our true selves into the relationship, it goes back to what you said in the beginning, Rory, that we're modeling a certain way of being, that the client can look at that and go, hey, I can dare to be my true self. I can make mistakes. I can just be who I am, and maybe that is acceptable. And I look back to my early years of training to become a counselor, and I remember a tutor walking in, writing something on the whiteboard, which was this new technology at the time. They'd just been put in, and struggling to work the technology of the whiteboard, and then turning around to us as the group and going, I'm really struggling with this. And I was thinking, wow, this is my first beginning of studying to become a counselor, and this person is being so honest and not, I'll be with you in a second, I just need to sort this out, turning around and saying, I'm really struggling with that. And that was kind of mirrored again later on in my studies where you were my tutor, Rory, and you would write things on the board and go, I'm totally dyslexic, I've probably spelt it wrong. If you want, you can come up and change the spelling, but my aim is that you can actually see what's written there. And I had been holding the secret of my own dyslexia my whole life. I can't spell. I struggle to read things. I was held back in education because of this, and I hid it away. I was not able. But to share that, I didn't feel it was acceptable. I thought that people would think less of me, and here was somebody sharing that. And I think that was great modeling of how that congruence made me accept myself more. I am now proudly dyslexic and will happily shout it from rooftops, and that's part of congruence. So I understand its therapeutic value, but I also understand from my own neurodiversity, I am diagnosed autistic, and that brings up challenges because I tend to be too congruent. It's a kind of one of my autism traits, is being too congruent, maybe at inopportune moments. So being truthful and sharing how it truly is inside with others has at times within my life caused problems. Not everybody wants to hear the truth all the time. And I guess it's about the appropriate use of that congruence within the right environment, which is a therapy situation. And this is the most important bit, always in service of the client.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. You know, everything we do, our whole interaction is in the service of the client. And I'd like to say something about congruence. A lot of people think that congruence is purely a person-centered idea, but actually it appears in other forms of therapy. You know, it appears in transactional analysis. Hagen and Sills produced a piece of work in 2008 called, I think it was called a relational psychotherapy, and they drew from Martin Buber, famous philosopher. They drew from Rogers. They drew from Patricia Clarkson. Patricia Clarkson talks about being real and genuine. So it is a universal idea within therapy. That I think all therapists would, you know, even CBT therapists. I say even CBT therapists.
Those letters coming in again.
I can feel the letters coming in. CBT therapists, who by their very nature, I think are directive because they're giving homework, they're giving strategy. I've met lots of CBT therapists who are very, very empathic, very real, very genuine. You know, may say, I understand that this is how you're seeing the world, and that might be a real struggle for you, but, you know, have a look at it from this perspective. So I think it's a universal ingredient to the therapeutic alliance, no matter what modality you're practicing, or modalities if you're integrative.
Yeah, and you know, so it is universally applicable within a therapeutic relationship. And I guess it comes back to where we started as we kind of end this topic, that it's about self-development and it's about looking into self. In order to be congruent, we need to know who we are. In order to show what we feel inside on the outside and be true with no distortion, we need to fully understand what is going on inside. And then there is the pinch of salt that gets thrown onto congruence for me, in that when we're going, well, this is my truth, this is who I am, this is how I see things, therefore I'm going to put that out as congruence, we need to kind of keep in mind that our truths are developed from our experience, from the road we've traveled, from the parenting we had, from the religious upbringing we may have had, from the schooling we may have had, in the society we may have had, and that colors everything that we see. It colors who we are. So even our congruence, when we're bringing it over, is colored with who we are and the road we've walked on, and it is our truth at that point. And I loved a quote that I saw by Gandhi, and I can't remember the exact quote, but it was basically it was a journalist that was saying to Gandhi after Gandhi had said something in an interview, but you in a previous interview said X, Y, and Z. And Gandhi said, yes, and that was my view and my thoughts at the time. However, my views and thoughts have now changed, and I now think A, B, C. And it's about that. Your congruence today may be a little different to your congruence tomorrow, and hopefully different to the congruence that you may show in a year's time. But that's about that personal development. Wow. Well, there's the challenge, isn't it? Have a think about this topic. How does it apply to you? How does it apply to your own personal development? How does it apply to the way that you choose to run your practice?
Absolutely. What's stopping you from being all of you? I think that's a really good question to ask. And usually with incongruence, there's a discomfort. If you're not being you, it is a feeling of discomfort or a feeling of a lack of completeness. And that's something that comes up a lot of training, that students will say, I feel complete now that I can be who I am. I can speak who I am. And as we Ken said, I don't know how it felt for you to be able to say, I'm dyslexic. I'm Ken and I'm dyslexic. But I would imagine there was a sense of a more complete Ken in the room.
Moving on from congruence, we now go into our next section, which is where we focus on self, and we're speaking about feelings of incompetence. It's interesting, the topics really marry well together. So if I'm feeling incompetent, do I tell my client? There's linking it into congruence. But of course, we're just going on to that. Feelings of incompetence, pretty common, Rory.
It is. And I was thinking about this. I did some reading around feelings of incompetence, or it's sometimes called FOI. That's the kind of trade name for it in therapy, feelings of incompetence. And it comes up in person-centered counselling action. Windy Dryden's written about it in his book, in a book called Applied Counselling, I think it was called. And it comes up in research papers a lot. And I was struck by a part of a journal article I read called Feelings of Incompetence in Novice Therapists, Consequences, Coping and Correctives. It was published in the Canadian Journal of Counselling in 2009. And one of the authors was Annie Thogteriou, a French researcher. And she talks about feelings of incompetence. So when you think of that word, those words, you think someone in not being competent. But the research actually says that people who are feeling feelings of incompetence actually try harder. They actually try harder. They're more analytical. They're more thoughtful. And I used to see this a lot when I was teaching, where you would get students and they say, I don't think I'm getting it right. I'm really struggling. The wringing of hands, and they genuinely wanted to be the very, very best for the client. And I used to have to sit them down and say, it sounds like you're working so hard here with your client. It's almost the opposite of what you're feeling, because you're really, really working hard. But I think that it's not just a feeling that one gets in first trainings. I'm not doing this right, or am I applying the theories, and am I hearing everything? I think you get feelings of incompetence when you're training maybe a different modality or even in supervision. I know when I did my supervision training, I didn't think I was getting it right for a long time. And I'd been a practicing therapist for 5 or 6 years before I took my supervision qualification. But the word I would use is discombobulation, which is a Northern English term for feeling a bit not connected, a bit kind of, not quite right. But it can be quite paralyzing, can't it? The feelings of incompetence can.
Yeah, and it's a universal emotion. So when we speak about that feeling of incompetence, if you think about the word imposter syndrome, I feel like an imposter. I feel like anybody's going to find out any minute now that I'm faking this and everything's going to come falling down around me. This is something that is heard by therapists all the time from clients coming in and sharing that. But we're not immune to it. It's a human condition. It's a human condition that we will compare ourselves to others and compare ourselves to a ideal version of ourselves that we think that we should be attaining, that we should be this, I should understand that, I should have been doing it this way. And that is very, very tiring. And it can end up being a place where we can get trapped. It can lead in its extreme cases to paralysis, as you said, Rory, and it can lead to individuals stopping doing the good that they're doing because of that paralysis. And the thing is, as soon as we enter into that reference, into that way of thinking, we're engaging in a fantasy world that doesn't exist. It's not based in reality. It's based in fantasy. It's based in our heads, and it goes round in our heads, and it can tend to kind of spiral, going round and round and round, with negative messages dropping out of that. One way to work with that is to take it to supervision. Another way to work with that is speak to a peer. This is a great topic to take to peers and say, you know what, I'm feeling so incompetent in what I'm doing. I'm whatever it is, you share it with peers. Get the words out, because it changes the energy cycle from going round and round in one place inside the head. When the voice voices it and it's heard by other ears and you get feedback from others, it kind of can take some of the power out of that imposter syndrome, in that feeling of incompetence. And of course, it's about the measure of it. So if you're about to go on a new training and you've looked over the prospectus of what that may entail, and you're going, oh, how am I going to manage all that work? I've got so much on it. Maybe that's just a natural excitement to something new. It's when you find these kind of thoughts or feelings going around in you a lot, and it's affecting your work, when it's bringing up anxiety, causing your palms to sweat, causing your pulse rate to go up. It's doing you no service at all. And it's worth having a think about how you deal with that, because it is a fantasy activity that is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also one to take to personal therapy as well, because it might be that, the feelings of incompetence you're experiencing being in your counselling practice it may be a symptom of a wider not feeling confident or competent in your own life. And I think that's why, certainly during first trainings, and indeed, I think throughout the arc of our lives, whether we're therapists or not, to access therapy when we're feeling that we're not connected. In fact, it links really to congruence that we talked about at the top of the podcast. So getting your own personal therapy around, why is it that you feel incompetent? Why is it that you feel this? And you're absolutely right, Ken. In my experience, and I suffered from crippling FOI when I was in my first trainings, absolutely crippling. It is all in your mind. It's all in your head. And once someone had sat down and kind of patiently explained this and said the only person who could switch off this kind of mallet or bat I was beating myself on the head with was me. It was really, I really had to say to myself, how much of this do I want to inflict on myself? Really, how much do I want to inflict on myself? And slowly but surely, I gave myself an easier time. I was a little bit easier with myself. And I think crucially, I was more forgiving of what I perceived were mistakes. Nobody, and I mean nobody, is perfect. And I've made some errors when I've been counselling. I've missed clients. They've said something. I've thought that they meant one thing and they meant another. And I can remember famously summarising. And I may have talked about it in the podcast, but it was when I was a counsellor in the school doing a summary at the end of a session. And as I got to the end, I thought that was the most awful summary had ever come. It was completely not connected at all with the clients. And I apologized. I said, and the client was very, very, very forgiving and said, it's fine, Rory. Now, I think in my earlier training days, I would have gone away and I would have torn myself apart with that. And I would have thought about giving it up and thought about, the damage I've inflicted on the client. And actually, I just thought to myself, I'm just human.
Yeah.
I missed the client this day. I apologized. I was genuinely trying to do my best. And when I hooked up with the clients again next week, I said, hope you're okay. And, I'm going to try harder with my summary. And the client, as only young people can do, said, it's all right. It's okay. And we got on famously. But I did think at the time that, I took it up in supervision, obviously, and we looked at it in supervision, but I wasn't going to pull myself apart and let it permeate my working days and invade my sleeping nights. It was just something that I missed the mark on. And it wasn't a sign of incompetence, it was a sign of being human.
It's the antidote that you're referencing there, Rory, that self-acceptance. We speak about unconditional positive regard towards the clients. It's something we strive to. It's one of those conditions that facilitates the therapy, that no matter who they are, no matter what they bring, we see a fellow human there and we realize that they're doing their best that they can in their journey. Sometimes difficult to reflect that on ourselves, that unconditional positive regard to ourselves, to accept ourselves as just trying our best. And when we find ourselves in the I should have, I could have thinking, well, we didn't, because should have and could have lies in the past of something that has gone past. Within that moment, Rory, in the story you're telling, you were doing your best in that moment. It was whatever tripped you up, and that is human, and it is about that self-love, that acceptance of ourself. And we were speaking about how it can have underlying conditions that will lead to the feelings of incompetences. And one of the things that can lead to a feeling of incompetence is getting something wrong. Like you've just shared there, Rory, you're in a session and you bring something out and you get it wrong. You can be left shaken. Now, you took the antidote straight away. You had that unconditional positive regard for self. You were congruent in seeing what had happened, mentioning it to the client, getting feedback, so it was dealt with there and then within that moment. But obviously, we're still around with you at some stage because you did choose to bring it back again the next week,
yes.
Which is interesting.
Yes.
Isn't it amazing how the more negative feelings and emotions tend to stick around a lot more than the positive. Somebody says, thank you, that was a great job. It's easier forgotten than that was just not good enough. Come on. Yes. That we will remember for a lifetime. But what I'm getting to here is, we all get it wrong. It's part of being human. And what is your relationship with getting things wrong? If you look back on your history, what was it like at school if you got it wrong? What it was if you didn't achieve? What was there a consequence? Have you related a heavy negative to not getting something right, to failure? What is your view on failure? Because if you think about anything that has ever been invented, has gone through multiple failures to get there. The light bulb, I don't know how many times, but I mean, if he'd have got it wrong the first time and gone, oh, you know what, I just can't do this, it'd be very dark in my room at the moment. We've got to get things wrong to get them right. But what is that relationship with failure? So if we're feeling incompetence, that feeling of incompetence is, I'm going to get it wrong, I'm not good enough, I'm going to fail at this. What is that relationship that you hold within self? So it's again, it all comes back to that looking at self, working with self, growing, personal development.
Absolutely, Ken. And I think it comes down to a term I use called bracketing, being able to bracket off something that's not possibly gone as well as you'd thought it had, and to be able to kind of suspend that and then maybe look at it, at distance, or look at it in supervision. And, I would say to my students, if something you feel, first of all, I'd say, well, what did the client say? And if the client didn't say anything, the client was very happy. Well, that's the ultimate audience for who you are and how you're working. And also I'd say, just bracket that off, and then take that to supervision and explore it, as opposed to letting it be the narrative of everything you do. But, literally just put it into a box and put it to one side, and then pull that box out when you need to. And I think you're absolutely right. As someone once said to me, we're all stretched out kids.
Yes.
And through the arc of our lives, we carry through messages that we had, when we were children. Because being a child, it's a very formative part of our existence, and negative comments or punitive responses to getting things wrong aren't easily shrugged off as when you're a child, because it's not just being berated for getting it wrong, it's the huge imbalance of power that comes with being a child and an adult speaking to you. And I think those sometimes carry on through the arc of our life. And again, the best place to look at that and kind of heal that, and you use the word antidote, and I'm going to use the word heal, Ken, is through our own personal therapy to realize that getting it wrong is another opportunity to be brilliant.
Oh, yes, I really, really like that. And when those feelings come up for you again, as I know they will for me, because they do, I get that feeling of incompetence, feeling of imposter syndrome from time to time. So I know it will come up again for me. And when it comes up for you listening to this, remember that it's a natural feeling. It's something that we all feel from time to time. And then remember what Rory started this with. It's only because you care. It's only because you care enough to want to get it right. If you didn't care, you wouldn't feel that way. So I guess there is a positive to that. Lovely discussion. I've really enjoyed that. And that is why we focus on self, because we are at the center of our practice. And as we move away from the focus on self, we go into Practice Matters. Practice Matters is our section where we take something that we may come across in our practice room. And today's something you certainly may come across. When you have a client who comes in front of you and says, you know what, I think that I might be drinking too much. I'm using substances to get through. I don't know what to do. And you recognize that there may be an addictive personality there, an addictive compulsive behavior. How do you work with that? And it does take specialist training. And that's why, Rory, you got together and spoke with an expert on this.
Yes, I did. I spoke with Marion Elkin-Greener, a real friend of Counselling Tutor, and a passionate kind of advocate for working with people with addiction. Very, very experienced and just a lovely person. And this is what she had to say.
Practice Matters.
And we welcome Elkin-Greener, who has done a fabulous lecture for the Counsellor CPD resource on working with addiction. So first of all, Mer, thank you so much.
My pleasure. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's good to see you as well. And the first thing is, what do people have to consider when working with someone with an addiction? What does a therapist have to take into account that may be different maybe to working with the clients who bring, say, bereavement or loss or a form of trauma?
Yeah. I think the first thing that comes up for me, and it's a pretty universal thing when you're working with clients, is to really check your judgment, check your, how you're looking at it. I don't see addiction as any different than someone who perhaps says to me that they have breast cancer or a physical issue like diabetes, etc. I see someone who has an illness, who's not well. And it's not only just mentally and physically, their brain has, in my training and how I look at it, their brain has become addicted to a substance, or if not a substance, it's gambling or pornography, sexual addiction. I mean, run the gamut. So I'd just probably say that, I find sometimes that even people in our profession, if they've not got a lot of experience in the addiction arena, they tend to have a judgment call, which of course can stoke the stigma that's out there about people with addictions or just with mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that brings me on to my next question, which is, of course, it takes a lot of courage for someone with an addiction to come and ask for help, doesn't it? Because of that societal stigma that goes around it, the finger pointing, why don't you just stop? It's your fault.
Yeah. And these are people also who, depending their family system, they may not have much family support left anymore. Friendships are gone, marriages are finished or broken, or may not have contact with their children anymore. I mean, these are people who are traumatized, and on top of it all, trying to deal with the addiction that they've got as well, that's taken a hold and just taken over their life in every way you can imagine.
So it may be that, part of working with addiction is working with loss.
Oh, absolutely. And working with loss, and it, obviously brings up, to me, grief, obviously brings up anger. I mean, I think you circle through the Kubler-Ross stages of grief with addiction. And I think I've met a lot of people with addictions who are obviously their self-esteem is bad, their confidence is not in a good place, and they're angry. Anger comes to mind, and they're ashamed. Ashamed comes to mind too. So there's a lot of work to be done on that as well, and just building up their self-esteem and confidence again through working on their sobriety, or the recovery, I should say. It might not necessarily be sobriety in terms of drugs or alcohol, but it might be something else that they're working on recovery on in addiction.
Yeah, and I think that's an important part too, isn't it? Because I know many people, and I have friends who would call themselves in recovery, almost like it's a continual process.
Yes, yeah. And I think it is. And, you hear now people talk about being in recovery, and it's not necessarily, like I said, for substances. It can be for many different things, and I think that recovery itself obviously is so different for each person, and looks different, feels different for the individual. So I think just as you would take someone who you work with mental health issues, you would also try to have no judgment with someone who has mental health and addiction issues, which I have to say, Rory, and this might be controversial, but I have not treated anybody that has an addiction issue that doesn't have an underlying mental health issue. The addiction is usually the symptom of the mental health issue.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I was sharing that controversy. I've had a lot of experience working with people who've been in active addiction, and you don't have to scrape the surface too much to see the underlying issues, whether that's bereavement, loss, historic trauma, and the addiction is used sometimes to mask that, to escape from it.
Sure. And then it's just, I think, with my background and training in it, I'm a licensed addiction specialist, and when you learn that how the brain takes hold of the addiction itself, and they can see the differences when people have done scans of the brain, etc. That whole system lights up when a substance is put into it, or the addict, utilizes their addiction. So, there's something to be said about all of that. It's very powerful, and I think anyone I've worked with that has an addiction has said that it just is so powerful and overcoming, and very hard to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's why I guess they call it an addiction, because people are addicted. Are there any kind of contracting things that need to be put in place when working with someone for addiction? And I'm thinking of maybe turning up in sobriety, at least for the session.
Certainly in the past, for me, practicing privately, there's been protocols in place that I won't provide therapy to someone who is who comes to a session who is clearly inebriated or using substances. But it's kind of a case-by-case basis, because you do have somebody who's perhaps an alcoholic, maybe is utilizing alcohol, because if they weren't drinking, they would have a seizure, they would have a fit, I should say.
Yeah.
So they have to maintain some sort of alcohol in their system to keep going, because they could have a fit, or they have had fits in the past, seizures in the past. So it's a very case-by-case basis for me. I've turned people away. I've said, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to do that. And it's more of a kind of support system, or, maybe I've had the permission to call a family member or somebody to come and help them. Or I've had the occasion once where I wouldn't let someone drive, danger to self or others.
Yes.
That only happened once. And again, it just really depends what I feel they can take in. Because yourself, if you've drank a lot or you've used a lot, then you're not gonna, you won't have the focus, you won't remember. So, you have to be quite honest with that. And I'm quite honest with the person I'm working with, if that's the case. But in a kind of gentle way. I'm not there to shame them anymore. The very fact that they're there and have showed up, I might not spend a therapeutic hour with them, but I might spend time with them, supporting them, and just saying, how you doing? And have you been drinking today? And what's going on? But keep it quite light, I guess.
Yes. Because I guess that if someone is used or has taken alcohol, you don't want to go too deep into the therapeutic relationship, because they may not be robust enough or in a place to be able to explore that. Yeah.
I mean, I've had people say to me, I'm going to leave your session, I'm going over to the pub, or I'm going to the off license to get my blah, 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 blah. And sometimes it's just about harm reduction. You'll say, well, are you going to be with someone? Are you doing this alone? Or do people know where you are? And it's more of a kind of safety issue, because you can't tell someone don't do that. That's not therapeutic either. So it's a tough one, it can be really tough, but it's very case by case basis for me when I treat people who, if they turn up and they've clearly been using.
I mean, I think that's been a really great overview of some of the themes you may pick up and may explore in the lecture. Finally, what takeaway would you like to offer to those who are listening to this interview? What would you like them to take away and perhaps put into their own practice after the lecture?
I think for me it's important. It's really an introduction, Rory, to the world of addiction. Listen, I've taught 12-week classes on this, so this is going to be a little different. I don't get 12 weeks to do this. Yes. So, I think for me, it's just having a good foundation and understanding of the world of addiction, and introduction to it, what different addictions are. The very fact that, addiction is a symptom of a bigger issue, a bigger trauma, a bigger mental health issue. And also just, I hope to cover some of the treatment options that are out there here in the UK for people who have addiction issues.
Well, I for one, am really, really looking forward to this lecture, because I think it's an issue that's going to cross every practitioner's door at some time or another. So, Marion Elkin-Greener, thank you so much.
Big thank you to Marion Elkin-Greener. Thank you to you, Rory, for hosting that interview. And of course, if you wanted to listen to the whole lecture on working with addictions, you can get that in the Counsellor CPD library. If you are a member, log in. It has just been added to the CPD library. If you're not yet a member of the Counsellor CPD library, go to counsellingtutor.com. All the information is there for you. This has been episode 200 of the Counselling Tutor podcast.
It has, and what a podcast. We celebrated close to 2 million downloads. So thank you as always for listening. And we have listed our top 10 podcasts. We then went on to discuss Counselling Foundations, being congruent, being real. What is it that holds you back from being the whole of you? Then we moved on to Focus on Self, which of course is the FOI, feelings of incompetence. And we explored why people may feel not whole or not competent, and some of the solutions and the antidotes to that. And then finally, we met up with Marion Elkin-Greener, who gave us a wonderful overview of a lecture she produced on working with addictions. And as always, stay grounded, stay safe, and with 2 million downloads, thank you for listening.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.